Hello and welcome. This is Kim Burns. This is a mini topic series on the topic of misbranding and adulteration. Welcome. So, the purpose of the mini topics, if you've already listened to some, that's great. If not, this is to supplement the textbook readings, lecture slides, notes, discussions during class, and or any other side materials. So this is definitely a topic sometimes that there are key points that I want to share with maybe in this shorter version that may help clarify some concerns. It is truly some quick information regarding the basics of this topic, such as the who, what, when, where, and why, and how, right? So I'll go through pretty quick. And please keep in mind that this brief presentation does not represent or include all the information expected on the topic. So the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act, which is a federal law, one of the major federal laws that impacts pharmacy practice, manufacturing, distribution, everything, enforced by the FDA, was originally passed back in 1938 and has amendments to date. Two of the major violations of this law include misbranding and or adulteration. And I say and I'll explain why here as we go through. This is a strict liability law, which means you don't have to have intent to be held accountable. If it is violated, the FDA can bring charges against you or they can hold you accountable for it. And although a lot of times the focus of misbranding or adulteration is on the manufacturing, especially since they have to comply with current good manufacturing practices, distribution, it does also impact the practice of pharmacy and pharmacy practice in terms of like the community or those types of settings, because we deal with these medications, right, after they go from the manufacturer to the distributor or repackager to us and then to the patient. So we're still handling these medications. And sometimes the pharmacy does activities that basically rise to the level of a manufacturing activity or more. So these are the key points of misbranding. So if you actually look at like the definition or the legal wording of it, right, it's going to have information in there that says if certain things aren't met, it's deemed to be misbranded. And oftentimes, students or individuals just think about this as false or misleading label or labeling. So obviously that would be the manufacturer labeling, but that can also come down to the pharmacy label as well too. But that's not all there is to misbranding. There's quite a bit more. So that's why when you go through and you read these points, you'll see, oh, okay, if it's not packaged correctly, that's a misbranding. If it's an imitation drug, that's misbranding. So there is more things that could make a product misbranded in addition to or outside of false or misleading label or labeling. So this is just a brief summary of the things that can lead to misbranding. So basically, if you look at the slide before, so false and misleading labeling, that's probably the most commonly referred to one. But also if you have a missing manufacturer, packager, or distributor or quantity on the package, if you are missing FDA required statement warnings, so if there's supposed to be something on the label or labeling and it's not, it's imitation of a drug, if they fail to have adequate directions for use, if it's dangerous, the label, or lacks information on the dangers, if it doesn't meet the packaging requirements. So for example, the Poison Prevention Packaging Act is a federal law that requires prescription drugs that we handle to be certain packaged away, as well as the manufacturers and distributors. And we also have a tamper evident law too. So if you don't have your OTC products with a tamper evident seal, if you will, then that could also lead to misbranding violations. And if you dispense a prescription without a valid prescription, meaning you don't have a valid prescription and you dispense it, that's also a misbranded product because to be exempt from the labeling requirements of the FDA, for example, the pharmacy, they have to have a valid prescription. So that's another example where you can see misbranding. Turning to adulteration, these are key points for adulteration. Again, oftentimes the main thing people think about is, okay, it's dirty, it's contaminated, but there's more than that. So you can see that, again, it's it consists of whole or in part of filthy, putrid, or decomposed substances, and those are words right from the language of the law or rules. If they're held in unsanitary conditions, and it's not even the fact that they are definitely adulterated, it's also the fact that they could be adulterated. Okay, so I'll talk about an example here in the pharmacy. So the drug's container, if it's composed of any substance which may contaminate the drug, that's also considered adulteration. So again, it's things that may lead to something else. Drugs prepared, packaged, processed, or held under conditions that violate the current good manufacturing practices. Again, it's typically the manufacturers and distributors that have to follow that, but sometimes pharmacies have to as well, especially if they're into certain kind of compounding like 503B pharmacies, or if they're doing certain types of repackaging activities as well. Drugs that contain an unsafe color additive is considered adulterated. Drugs that purport to be those recognized in official compendia, but the strength, quality, or purity falls below the standard. So if they're supposed to meet a certain standard and they don't, then that's adulteration. So this is where you can kind of sometimes have overlap with misbranded products, because if the label's wrong and if it's because of the strength, then it's both. Then if you have drugs mixed or packed together, and when they're together, they're chemical compounds, so they could reduce the quality of the strengths of each other. So that's why quite often you're not allowed to put drugs together in certain types of packagings, or if you do, you're limited in the amount of time that it can be in there. So I have another little wheel here, if you will, of kind of pointing to the number of things that adulteration can be caused by. Filthy, putrid, decomposed substances, like I mentioned, prepared or packed in unsanitary conditions. The container may be contaminated, current good manufacturing practices, unsafe color additive, strength quality falls below, drugs mix or lacks the tamper-evident packaging as well too. So we have that Tamper-Evident Packaging Act that now I've mentioned in both, and violations of that is misbranding and adulteration. So that's a separate federal law that requires OTC products to have that. But if that's not met, that's adulteration and misbranding too. So as I mentioned, this primarily, you typically hear about it with the manufacturers, because obviously they have to comply with the current good manufacturing practices all the time. And the pharmacy, even if they don't have to comply with the CGMPs, there's times that we could deal with adulterated or misbranded products, or we could cause a product to be adulterated or misbranded. So some examples, common examples, right, that you might see in pharmacy practice, especially in the community setting or other types of settings, but this is not an all-inclusive list, is if, and I've mentioned some of them, but just to go over it and put it in the perspective of pharmacy practice, if you dispense a prescription without authorization, right, because you need that valid prescription to be exempt from the manufacturer labeling. If you misfill a prescription, so basically you misbranded the product, okay, because you misspelled it and the labeling is wrong. But if it's also the wrong strength, it also adds on adulteration. And that's because of that one statement that says it purports to be under the adulteration. So that is an example where you can have misbranding and adulteration together. Drug dispense without the required patient package inserts or the medication guides, that's misbranding. False or misleading advertising of a compounded product is also deemed to be misbranding. Counting a medication on a tray with a residue from another medication. So if you think about the penicillin and the tablets, how they have that powder, if you count them out on a tray in the pharmacy, you have that residue on there, and if you don't clean that off, and then you put another medication on there, that medication could be contaminated now with the penicillin. So that's considered adulterated. Then if you store medication in improper temperatures, that could be adulteration. So take the example of a pharmacy that orders a medication in, it gets shipped to them, and it's supposed to be in the refrigerator, stored in the refrigerator. But unfortunately, someone in the pharmacy neglects to do that or forgets or doesn't know, and they put it on the shelf instead. So again, it could be that it has, not the stability it should be, and it's deteriorated. So, but maybe it's not. But the fact that it could be, it's adulterated. So I've actually had this example to us in practice before where we've gotten something and it wasn't stored properly. And we'll try calling the manufacturer and we'll say, okay, it came, at this time, so it was out of the refrigerator for 12 hours, right? Like, what does that mean? And they've done studies on it, so they can say, okay, it can stay out for 4 hours, but we can't guarantee that, it didn't deteriorate at all after that. So that's one way you can try and handle that. But in general, if you don't store something properly, whatever the temperature range is, then that's an issue. If you don't dispense a product in a child-resistant container, that's misbranding, because remember, you have to meet the packaging requirements. And like I said, the tamper-evident packaging requirement, if you are dealing with products that have to meet that, that can be adulteration and misbranding. So in summary, misbranding and adulteration are two of the major violations under the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act. We have this law, which is a strict liability law, but it not only impacts manufacturers and distributors, it impacts all the way down to the pharmacies, pharmacists. There are various key points within the definitions and elsewhere in terms of these main violations. I shared with you some common what ifs that could happen in pharmacy practice, but you should still think about the key points like violating CGMPs. That might not apply to you in your pharmacy, but you still want to understand that that would be an adulterated product. And keep in mind that something can be adulterated and misbranded at the same time. So those are the main things that we discussed. And just to back up and mention about how things can be misbranded and adulterated at the same time, or trying to determine if something is misbranded or adulterated. If you keep those key points in mind, which is like the definition, if you will, of how things can be misbranded or adulterated, if you're given a what if, then you could apply that to there. But if you're trying to think of a what if, but you can't remember those key points, then you may not remember everything under there. So that's how I recommend to try and approach the questions, is first knowing those key points, then if you get a what if scenario, to apply it to there. So that's really it for this mini topic. So if you still need more help from the text lectures and discussions, you can actually visit the FDA website. They do have some information on there about misbranding and adulteration. It's not all specifically, obviously, for the practice of pharmacy because it goes above that. But if you wanted to read more, you can find some more information on there. Thank you and have a great day.